And gentlemen, thank you for your service. There's been a lot of discussion today about the budget and a continuing resolution. And one of the issues that seems to be forgotten here is last year the Appropriations Committee, Defense Approps, voted out of committee almost unanimously a defense budget. And unfortunately, it came to the floor last summer right around this time, and it was filibustered. So if we did that again, Secretary Mattis, would that be helpful to have a defense budget that we worked on, voted out of committee, and then be filibustered? Is that helping our troops if that happens again? I certainly hope it doesn't happen again, but I'm just trying to get your view on it.
I think it'd be horrible for our country as well as our troops, sir.
Secretary Mattis, I really appreciate your focus on the Asia Pacific. I know it wasn't lost on our key allies in the region that was your first trip as a secretary, and your recent visit to Singapore with the Shangri-La dialogue, I also think was important for a whole host of reasons. Sorry I couldn't have joined you. I had an event that was even more important than the Shangri-La dialogue, which was a high school graduation of one of my daughters. Otherwise, I would have been with you. I read your speech in the Q&A afterwards. I thought it was outstanding. Can you succinctly state U.S. policy as it relates to freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea and other areas, just so both our allies and adversaries are aware of it?
Yes, sir. We operate freely in international waters, and we do not accept unilateral inhibitions on the international waterways and their use or airways.
And are we going to continue to do that on a regular basis with our allies if possible?
We will unilaterally or in league with our allies, yes, sir.
So I read in the press the USS Dewey conducted a FONOPS near Mischief Reef within the 12 nautical miles, and we even conducted military-type training, a man-overboard mission, according to the press reports. The Chinese, according to press reports, protested that. What was our response in response to their protest?
To reiterate that we operate in international waters, sir.
I also very much appreciated your focus, and General Dunford, your focus on the importance of our allies. You highlighted that quite well in your Shangri-La dialogue speech. Can you just touch on that again for the committee's benefit and the benefit of the American people, just how important our allies are, not only in the Asia-Pacific, but globally in terms of us securing our national security objectives?
Senator Sullivan, there's an awful lot of talk about asymmetric advantages and competitive advantages and disadvantages, and I would put our allies and our alliances from NATO to the Pacific, bilateral, multilateral, as our asymmetric advantage, especially if you put a list of our allies alongside a list of China's allies or Russia's alliances. You can see the proof coming through from history that nations with allies thrive and those without them do not thrive.
So we're an ally-rich nation, and our adversaries and potential adversaries are ally-poor. Is that one way to look at it?
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And so we should be working to deepen those alliances and expand them, correct?
Absolutely.
And do you think everybody in the administration gets that and is doing that?
As you know, sir, Secretary Tillerson and I work very closely together exactly along these lines. He leads foreign policy. I provide military factors and buttress his efforts. And I also know that in terms of Homeland Security, Secretary of Homeland Security Kelly is working with our closer allies around the hemisphere, but also further out to try and protect the country. So I see it being a theme that is being carried forward. Yes, sir.
Let me just finish up, maybe follow up on a couple questions Senator Graham asked about North Korea. And I actually very much appreciated what the President and Vice President did when they invited 100 U.S. senators over to the White House to get the briefing with the President there, the Vice President, H.R. McMaster, and all of you. I thought that was actually very useful, very important. One element that I thought was very important was that you were clearly trying to get the Congress in a bipartisan way to be supportive of this new strategy. And I think, as you know, Mr. Secretary, our country's at its most powerful when the executive branch, legislative branch are working together on difficult issues, when Democrats and Republicans are working closely together on difficult issues, which is why I thought what the President did that day, inviting everybody over to hear about our strategy firsthand from you and others, and General Dunford, was so important. Is a nuclear ICBM armed in North Korea the most significant threat we face right now as a nation?
It's certainly the one that's in the hands of a potential rogue state that we have to consider.
And is it increasing? Increasing. That threat is increasing, heightening.
No doubt, every test, we assume they're learning from it.
Do we need more missile defense capabilities for our nation?
Right now, I believe we can protect the nation, but as we look to the future, absolutely.
Gentlemen, I just wanted to follow up on the North Korea discussion briefly. Mr. Secretary, General Dunford, I know you're a Korean War history buffs in many ways. I've heard you talk about the Korean War. As a matter of fact, yesterday in your House Armed Services testimony, General Dunford, you talked about a potential conflict on the Korean Peninsula. Seoul residents would face casualties unlike anything we've seen in 60 or 70 years. And General Milley had similar testimony a couple of weeks ago before this committee about what a conflict on the Korean Peninsula could be like. Mr. Secretary, you just mentioned the rapidly developed threat that the North Koreans present in terms of an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile. And to Senator Graham's question, you stated it was the policy of the Trump administration to prevent them from getting that capability. And I think you have strong support from most members of the committee on that. But it certainly does seem like those two issues are going to start colliding here relatively soon. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of ways to prevent them from getting that kind of capability, left of launch kind of activities. But if one of those ways was a decision to take some kind of preemptive military action, I believe that that would clearly trigger Congress's Article 1 authority with regard to declaring war, and you would need this body's authority to take such action. Do you agree with that, or has that been a discussion in the Trump administration? It's a very big issue that I'm not sure has gotten enough attention.
I've not brought that issue to the President's attention, sir. Right now, as you know, from Mar-a-Lago, where the President met with his counterpart, to Secretary Tillerson and I, who will be following up with our counterparts in next week or in 2 weeks here in Washington as we have strategic security dialogues. We're doing everything we can to avoid resorting to war in terms of protecting ourselves and our allies.
Well, I think it's an issue that should be on somebody's radar screen, because not that we want that, but part of what the President's been trying to do, and I'm fully supportive, is get the Congress to be supportive of his policy. Like I mentioned, that's why I thought the briefing at the White House a few months ago was actually very useful. But to continue to have that support, we need to be involved, and I think that's something that this committee needs to be cognizant of, but also the White House does as well. Let me ask one final question. In the past 6 weeks, the Russians have sent Bear bomber missions off the coast of Alaska that have been intercepted by our F-22s based there 5 times in the last 6 weeks. What do you think the Russians are up to with this kind of very persistent checking of our NORAD systems? And that's a pretty active engagement. Last time it was not just with Bear bombers, but with fighter escorts. What do you think they're trying to do in the Arctic, and what are they trying to achieve, and why are they so active up there?
Sir, I'm not sure what they're trying to achieve there. When you look at the combination of their cyber threats to democracies, when you look at what they're doing in Syria, the Bear bombers, as you put this panoply of activities together, it's very, very concerning, and we're going to have to turn this around. This cycle has got to be turned around. I think it is going in the wrong direction in terms of stability and peace, and this is where miscalculations can occur.